What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you without my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. I am, however, super pleased and excited and grateful to be joined by the one, the only, Ryan Blackburn. Covers the Denver Nuggets for Mile High Sports. He also is the host of the Alley Oop podcast that covers the entire NBA and speaks with guests for every team. Very digestible, very consumable. I am on it though, so take that with a grain of salt. Follow the Alley Oop Pod at Alley Oop Pod, spelled exactly as it sounds, and make sure you follow Ryan at NBA Blackburn, also spelled exactly as it sounds. Man, that was easy. I've been on the Alley Oop Pod a few times now, Ryan, and I went on, I think, Pickaxe and Roll a couple times as well too. I've never had you on this podcast, so this is long overdue. I'm excited to talk Denver Nuggets with you. That's why we're here. That's a team that, I was going through it because I fucked up our schedule and recorded I published an episode over the weekend I had held for this week, and I'm a psycho that believes in the same week we need 3 episodes. So I was going through teams that I wanted to tackle. I felt we neglected the Hornets, the Nets. No one fucking cares about those teams. We've been neglecting the Nuggets, though, because Grant and I, we talk about them. We're just like, well, they're our title pick, and we're just going to move on. It's like we're not worried about them. It's time to dig deeper into the Nuggets, though. They are the reigning champs. They are very good. First and foremost, though, how the heck are you?
Man, I'm doing good. Thanks for an awesome intro. Always happy to have you on the Alley Oop and on Pickaxe, and really appreciate you having me on this show. First time, man. First time for everything, and I always love listening to this show. You guys do such a great job of hitting such a wide range of topics, and you and Grant do an excellent job.
Well, I'm going to blush here. Thank you so much, Ryan. I cannot wait to potentially get you in some trouble because Nuggets fans were heading into the All-Star break. They were not happy with you.
Not happy at all.
I have a feeling the tenor of this podcast is going to be a lot more optimistic, though. I did want to start before getting into why they're mad at you. I guess we actually know now that I was going to ask you, did they have this stretch coming out of the All-Star break circled on their calendar? And it seems like the answer is, well, duh, yes, because Nikola Jokic sent a text message. You tweeted out the video that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope had said Nikola Jokic sent out the text message and heading out of the All-Star break or coming out of the All-Star break. And that's when KCP knew that, oh, this is legit. And so is this like, and you also posted something about Michael Malone. Really seems like they want to beat the Kings on Wednesday night, who they've lost 2-3 times this season.
Yeah, 3 times. And weird times for all of them. They've been on the second out of back-to-back on a couple of those occasions. But then the other one was heading into the All-Star break on the final game before the All-Star break. So not necessarily the greatest indication of just how they match up with the Kings, but Michael Malone, former coach of the Sacramento Kings, where he was unceremoniously fired in his second season while DeMarcus Cousins was dealing with, was it laryngitis or something like that? Like, I have no idea. But,
wild times.
You think Sacramento regrets that? I think they might. I think they might have regretted.
They would have fired him like 25 games later or something. So it's like kind of that thing where it's like, well, imagine if the Knicks had drafted Steph Curry, and it's like the Knicks would have traded Steph Curry for Melo or something like before Steph Curry was Steph Curry. So it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. But this stretch was interesting, and so I was actually the guy who asked KCP about that text, or about just what Jokic has done over the course of this post All-Star break stretch and just where he has been so different. And he sent out a text message to the entire team after the All-Star game and was basically, he didn't, like, KCP didn't share the exact specifics, but apparently hyped up the entire Nuggets media, the Nuggets chat, their own personal phone chat. So should be interesting to see what Denver does from here. But they're 3-0 out of the All-Star break. Jokic is putting up crazy numbers, historic numbers that we've never seen before. And it just
that's
feels
an annual occurrence, though, right? That's just Nikola Jokic's default. This
is a Tuesday for Nikola Jokic, man.
Yeah.
Like, that's just what he does. But it is interesting. Like when he really turns it on and when he's really locked in, I think it gives the team energy and it gives them a lot of belief. So nice to see it out of the All-Star break, and they're clearly rolling right now.
Is there anything specific and that you view as, oh, we need to watch this? In these 3 games that we've seen so far before they head into that matchup with the Kings, which is when this podcast will go live, that you're kind of just like, oh, this might be real, or this is really interesting, or this matters? Is it just Zeke Naji is alive and he's playing?
It's funny, man. Like, I think one thing that's gone under the radar for people about why Denver's kind of gone under the radar themselves, they have been a horrible transition offense. Horrible. Just like one of the worst in the NBA. And coming out of the All-Star break, that was one of the things that they talked about, just saying, hey, we need to be more detail-oriented. We need to understand what made us a great championship team. And they've been great out in transition over the course of these past few games. They've put the pedal to the metal against Washington, against Portland, and then against Golden State on the road. Some really, really impressive wins. Not necessarily all impressive teams, but Denver has put more detail-oriented work into these 3 games, and it's helped them tremendously, especially with their starting units. So, but it's nice. And hey, Zeke Naji's alive, man. That's one that we can circle back to and say, man, I thought he was a goner, but he's rising like the Undertaker, man.
Yeah, he's been great. Opponents are shooting under 59% against him at the rim.
Yeah.
Since he started re-entered the rotation, or first entered the rotation, whatever you want to call it. This team also, what's also kind of flown under the radar about them is we're officially at a point, their defense statistically has outperformed their offense so far. They're 9th in points allowed per possession per cleaning the glass, 10th in offensive efficiency, which is just absolutely wild. And this is a team, and you mentioned the Warriors victory specifically. If you're going to beat up on Portland, whatever, it's Portland. Yeah. But the win against the Warriors specifically was almost this harbinger of how far the Nuggets have come because of all the answers they now have defensively. And I think, and we'll get into more of Jokic probably like towards the tail end of this podcast, but you look at all the options they have. I know Denver's not considered a super athletic team, but to have Aaron Gordon, to have KCP chasing around these guys, to now have Peyton Watson in the equation. And then Nikola Jokic has talked about how he thinks his defensive IQ has improved, and it has. And it's like, it's not just, we always talked about, that became the cliche. Look at what the Nuggets, look at what Jokic can do when he's playing up high. Look at what Jokic can do now when he's playing in drop. Yeah. And it's just like, no, he's still not the greatest rim protector, but he's busting up plays. He's in the right spot. It feels like more than ever. I'd actually listen to the dunker spot, and Nekias Duncan had numbers on what the Nuggets were giving up when Nikola Jokic is in a drop. It's like 0.92 points per possession. I hope I got that number right, but shout out Nekias for having access to that info. This team is just like, it's why I couldn't bring myself to be concerned about them, mostly because I got concerned last year when they went through like their March, April malaise, and they remained my title pick, but they just annihilated everyone in the playoffs. But it's like they feel more complete than it, maybe not, because last year's team was complete, but like they might just be they've been more complete the past 2 seasons than I think they've actually received credit for, is what I'm getting at. When you look at the entire package, there's holes. You mentioned kind of, the transition stuff. They're not a team that necessarily wants to play super fast anyway. So I don't know where you sort of land on that, but like the entire Nuggets product, there are still questions, but when it really coalesces, this is one of the, like, what is the team that is more complete when you look at their like top end outcome right now? It might be Boston, and then I struggle to come up with any other challengers.
And then when you look at Boston, like, there are still those questions that they're going to have late game, where some of the functional stuff that they do throughout the first 43, 44 minutes of the game, you just don't know if that's going to happen again in the final 4 minutes. So it's a fair, understandable point and a fair criticism of them. But with Denver, they know what happens when they turn it on. One of the indicators for Denver over the past couple of years has been their clutch defense. And it was even more of an indicator last year where, man, they're kind of subpar to average for much of the year in their defensive rating. But during the actual clutch minutes, and when they were really trying hard, when they were really focusing, they locked in and were one of the best clutch defenses in the NBA. This year, teams like, and people aren't as taken surprised by Denver being a good defensive team, but they're bringing that more into the rest of the game. There are stretches throughout the rest of the game where they are more complete as a defensive unit. I think their bench defense is better than it was last year. And having Peyton, Watson, and Christian Braun kind of spearheading that off the bench was a big deal. And Denver's got a bunch of different guys that can, to your earlier points about the Warriors and Steph Curry, sort of switch around, do different things. They've been playing a bunch of different schemes, and they've got a lot of high IQ defenders on their roster that know what they're doing. Like even somebody like a Jamal Murray or Michael Porter Jr., guys who are, I think, considered liabilities within their actual defensive schemes, they're fine. Like if your worst defensive player is Jamal Murray or Michael Porter Jr., then like this is the Michael Porter that's actually like evolved. If those are your worst guys, you're doing pretty well. And Denver, like you said, 9th in defensive rating on the season. In the clutch this year, they are once again, I think, the best clutch defense in the NBA or close to it. And that's just, it's not something that other teams can replicate, man. Like they have a different gear that they can go to.
And their clutch stuff is held up too. When you I like to look at like the final 2 minutes of one possession games rather than just like the plus or minus 5. They're absolutely just like killing people. I think there's like 2 teams that have a higher winning percentage in those situations. So they're not always going to win easy, but they're going to win and they're just going to rack up wins. The macro stuff though, and this one I think is, we still haven't seen a lot of talk about it in Denver circles for sure, but nationally, how concerning is the management of Jamal Murray's shin splints, even knowing that from here on, Denver only has those, I think, 2 back-to-backs remaining.
Yeah, so played 3 games out of the All-Star break. Before the All-Star break, he was sitting due to those shin splints. Out of the All-Star break, he played the first game, sat the second night of a back-to-back, and then came back against Golden State. First game, he looked pretty good, but looked fine. When he came back against Golden State, he looked slow. He looked like he was managing pain in that game, and ultimately played a great one. Ultimately was very good in that one and kind of rose above the pain, I think. But it's those moments where like you can totally see him sort of being uncomfortable and not being a little bit more tentative and not necessarily putting pedal to the metal. I'm a little bit concerned about that personally, because you need Jamal Murray to be a tip-top shape in order to win a title. That's going to have to happen. And with the West the way that it is this year, you need him to be able to create as much space as possible against some of the perimeter defenders that he's going to have to face, like a Jaden McDaniels or a Lou Dort or guys of that nature at the top of the West, or hell, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George if you're facing the Clippers. There's a lot of matchups that you're going to have to work really, really hard against to create space and be athletic and be dynamic. And like, that's going to be one of those things that I'm watching for sure. Like, I love Jamal. I think he's great. I think he's one of those guys that is a gamer that will rise to that moment. And in the playoffs, he might just rise above that pain too. But you just never want a guy to have to go into a playoff series with pain. So hopefully they can manage him a little bit better and get him to be without that just heading into April and May.
Where do you land overall on Jamal Murray, who I think is kind of a sneakily divisive player? There's definitely the default of, well, look at what he's done in the postseason. And you just can't argue against what, like, the moments he's had in the postseason. He's had higher highs than a Joel Embiid, than a James Harden. I'm not talking about just winning a title, but just like his individual performances in general. And then yet he goes through these peaks and plunges in the regular season and even the playoffs. I think people kind of forgot that about last postseason because the Nuggets were able to kind of not steamroll, but they kind of ambled their way through the West playoff bracket. Like, Jamal Murray was kind of up and down to start that, but you just look at all he does, the tough shot making, the defensive switch that he has. Like, he's just gritty as fuck sometimes on defense. He has that switch. And if, like you said, if you consider him your worst defender, I still might consider Michael Porter Jr., but because he has the size, because of the stuff he could do as the low man, Jamal Murray's just like the smallest guy in that lineup. So the starting 5, so you default to him. What is just like, but then you look at the other thing, you look at the lineup data without Nikola Jokic when he plays, it's worse than ever. They're like minus 17 points per 100 possessions. And it's not, I mean, he's trying to carry some pretty sparse lineups, but where do you just, in the context of just the star hierarchy in the NBA, I've been asked about whether Jamal Murray can be a top 10 player. This was after the finals. And then now it sways a different direction where it's like, is Jamal Murray the product of just having Nikola Jokic around? The answer, of course, will lie somewhere in between, but I'm just very curious, as someone who has covered him so intimately over the years, where you sort of land on him as a player, because I do think the discussion around him is like kind of complicated.
He is perhaps the most divisive player on the Nuggets for sure. Lots of people would love for him to be able to sustain his greatness and sustain his incredible play without Jokic, and to be able to carry those other lineups, those different units that have clearly been a problem for Denver over the course of that, frankly, Jokic's entire career, where you get into these moments where, Jokic and the Nuggets they've built up a lead. They're +7, they're +10, whatever. And then that lead is automatically gone when Jokic comes back in, and that's never fun. Murray is one of those guys that in the playoffs, Denver found a lineup last year with him leading it, with Aaron Gordon as the 5, where he was able to be that leader, where he was able to be that primary ball handler, the decision maker, creating crazy shots and making them at a high level. He was doing that on a consistent basis at that point. I don't think that translates to the regular season, if I'm being honest, because he up here, like in the mental, he is somebody that, like, he needs it to have some stakes. And
Mhm.
I think he, more than anybody on the Nuggets this year, has sort of taken that laissez-faire approach to the regular season and said, I'll be ready for the playoffs. I'll be ready when I'm needed, because he's not really needed right now, despite the fact that Denver is currently a 3 seed and not a 1 seed. So it's hard to evaluate. Like, he's not going to be a guy that carries them as a true second star to Jokic. Like, that's just not what his role is going to be. And yet his skill set and his kind of the way that he plays augments what Denver does, to the point where they are unbeatable when you have Jokic and him. And what he is not quite an all-star in a traditional sense, but it might be more valuable than that in a playoff sense. Nobody really knows how to fully evaluate it, man. Like, it's wild here, because he goes through these highs and lows during the regular season, but you know what he can do in a playoff context no matter what.
It makes me feel better that you're at least somewhat torn, as
Yeah.
someone who's like actually seen more of him. It makes me feel better about not having like a definitive opinion on
No,
him.
like, I wouldn't call him a top 10 player or anything like that. If I were to put a number on it, and I did in the offseason, I would say that he is in the 16 to 20 range. And like, you can say, yeah, there are players in that top 15 that you guarantee, like regular season playoffs, whatever, like you're probably going to have them over him. But some of those guys pretty consistently don't perform that well in the playoffs either. And then you have somebody like a Jamal, who's probably like the 30th to 35th best regular season player and like the 10th or 11th best playoff player. Like, how do you balance that? How
Right.
can anybody balance that?
I think that's a good way to frame it. I don't know where I'd rank him specifically, but he's clearly outside the all NBA tier when you're looking at the regular season. But if we had all postseason teams, and let's just say you cut it down to 10 players, like 2 all postseason teams, he probably would have made 2 of those teams.
He might be on it. It would be crazy. And he does it over and over and over again. Like, even when he was 21 years old in his first playoff run, he's out playing Damian Lillard, man. Like,
what was that? And that Spurs series where it was like he literally cost them a game, but also won them 2. It was just Jamal Murray's one hell of a roller coaster ride. I love
wild, man. But it's a fun ride. And then what he does for this Nuggets team, like when he is at his best, they truly are unbeatable. That is the level that you can put them at. Like, if he is somebody that can rise to that level and kind of join Jokic on the pedestal at the top, then he is going to be somebody that makes Denver an unbeatable force. There's no other team that can really match up with them when he is at that level. And you've seen it in a couple times this year where he is facing the Boston Celtics on national TV, and like Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Derek White, Drew Holiday, it didn't matter who was in front of him. He still put up 35. And then in this last game against Golden State, this was a big matchup for Golden State. And Jamal rises to the occasion and scores 16 in the second quarter alone. So, like, it's just, you don't know how to evaluate it, man. It's crazy.
I will say one thing he does is those tough jumpers. And I would argue that the pull-up 3-pointer may arguably be like the most important or salient shot in basketball right now.
Yeah.
If you have someone who's just going to consistently hit those, and this year he's at 42.3% on off the dribble threes, and there have been
one of the highest on volume. Like, he's been really, really great at that. Like, I don't know how many other players in the NBA can match the volume and efficiency for him.
Oh, I'll tell you right now, there are 53 players who've attempted at least 100 pull-up 3-pointers. Only Duncan Robinson, who's going to have most of those be assisted, Mike Conley, because he's just a fucking stud, my God, and CJ McCollum are the only players who are hitting theirs at a higher clip while meeting that benchmark. So
that's wild.
Jamal Murray, good. There's the definitive conclusion.
Yeah.
You had mentioned Aaron Gordon quickly before. They have upped. I guess maybe they haven't, if you depend like how you viewed it last year when he was playing with Jeff Green. But they've increased, to me, the Aaron Gordon at the 5 arrangements. Those are destroying teams right now. We're up to almost 300 possessions on the season, which per Clean the Glass is way more than he logged between the playoffs and regular season last year. Again, the Jeff Green numbers kind of fudge that. Have you noticed anything specifically about those lineups that are really clicking this year versus last? And I will point out, like, the offense has been pretty good in those stretches. And when you look at the defense, they're not even getting, like, there's some opponent shooting noise, but it's not a lot. And so, like, they're not those differentials. I think they're like a plus 13 plus points per 100 possessions when Gordon is your 5. They're not getting lucky in those stretches. They're actually just winning them flat out. And look, those are important because Jokic is not on the floor, and any stretch that you can win with Jokic not on the floor, whether it's a few more minutes here, he's playing, 34 minutes during the regular season. even when he's playing 40 minutes in the playoffs, if you can just get by for a few minutes without him, it's huge. And so I'm just curious if you've noticed anything different or what's made those units or some of those units so effective.
So here is the key to non-Nikola Jokic minutes. You need somebody to be able to reprise what Nikola Jokic does. And there's one player on the roster that can do that at a reasonable level, and it's Aaron Gordon. Despite the fact that he's 6'7", 6'8", he's more of a power forward than he is a center, obviously. But when you slide him over to the 5, he's a big body, he's versatile, he can do a bunch of different things, but it's the underrated improvements that he has made to his game and his understanding of what needs to happen when he's on the floor. He is a great passer. He's a great passer at his position who doesn't obviously get to show it that much because he's mostly finishing plays when he's with Jokic and when he's with Murray. But more often than not, when he is at the 5, he's serving as that fulcrum of everything that they do. And the offense is generally pretty good when you run him with Murray specifically. But even if you're just running him with like Reggie Jackson and KCP and Michael Porter and guys like that, he's creating good shots from the post, from the top of the key, in transition especially. Like, he's a guy who loves to push the ball in transition and generates good shots that way. He is a great shot generator that is hiding in plain sight in Denver's offense because of what his role is for Jokic. And I think that's just a fascinating aspect for Denver. They did not, like, I didn't know what to expect when Aaron was going to be traded to the Nuggets. I thought it would be great. I thought it would be a great fit, but I thought it would be more narrow than what he's done. But he is like, he fills so many roles, man. He's a great jack of all trades in a lot of different categories, but his ability to scale up in those non-Jokic minutes is what I think is really, really helping them.
And that's like, those lineups are huge during the postseason. And now that they feel more of like a staple, that just feels like it could unlock a different sort of level for the Nuggets this playoffs. And that could be really important just because their path out of the West this year, I imagine, is going to be a lot harder than it was last season. When you just look at the level of teams where it's, well, if the Clippers are healthy, I know the Nuggets really don't care about the Clippers, which is fair. But if the Suns are healthy, there's the Timberwolves and the Thunder are rising. And there's another team, like, I don't really know how to feel about the Kings, the Lakers, or the Warriors, but if one of those three teams catches lightning in a bottle, the Mavericks just with Luka. So the path out of the West feels harder. And to have just these different, like, alternative units that you can fall back on, even for a few minutes at a time, so that Jokic can catch a breather, or even just playing opponents to a net even without him, that can end up being like mission critical, beyond mission critical.
Yeah, it's no doubt, man. Like, you need different looks in a playoffs, because how many minutes can you realistically just play your starting unit? It's not going to happen that much. Like, Jokic can play 40 minutes at a reasonable level. Asking him to play 42, 45, 48 is probably incorrect. And like, he can do it. He's proven that he can play 65 in a playoffs.
He's an Iron Man and has incredible stamina.
It's true. Like, and it's important to like just sort of understand who he is as a player too. But even still, like, you want everybody operating at peak physical condition and with peak circumstance, so you can maximize your wins, you can maximize your plus minus in those moments, and like, be as good as you can be at an individual level. And Aaron, like, finding opportunities for him to be that playmaker, I think, is really, really important for Denver, because he's also just going to switch on to everybody. He's like, there aren't that many better switch defenders in the NBA than Aaron Gordon, because he's had so much experience switching onto guards and guarding guards back when he was first brought on for Denver. But now he's like guarding centers, and he's guarding forwards, and he's guarding wings. Like, he does all of these different things for Denver specifically. Oh, and he's a great rebounder. Oh, and he's a great passer. Oh, and he's driving to the rim and just barreling into people and drawing contact and getting to the free throw line. He's a great player, man. Just kind of hiding in plain sight in what is a crazy Western Conference. But you need those versatile athletes in order to match up with what is a crazy West, because all of those different matchups that you talked about, whether it's the Warriors or the Lakers or the Kings or whoever, like, you need a player like Aaron Gordon to kind of flexibly match what he needs to do in those cases. You know what you're going to get from Jokic. You know what you're going to get from Murray. Now you know what you're going to get from Gordon, and it's just what the team needs. It's not any one particular thing. It's just what they need.
This is an Aaron Gordon related question, but I'm going to use it as a launching pad for a KCP, some appreciation talk. Who is the third most important player on the Nuggets? And I do think it's often framed as Michael Porter Jr. or Aaron Gordon, but I do believe The answer might be Aaron Gordon. I'm curious to know what your answer is, but when you look at the defensive difficulty that KCP has, where it's, yes, Aaron Gordon is clearly their most versatile defender, but if you look at who's probably going to defend the other team's best player on most nights or just the highest usage player, it's going to be KCP, and he does that job. He's, I think, been crucial to, they've done a really nice job limiting opponent 3-point volume, which I think that can be impacted way more by the defense than actual 3-point efficiency, where a lot of fans are like, yeah, we have the best 3-point defense in the league. And it's like, all right, let's chill. So where that first part of that question, who is the Nuggets' third most important player to you?
It's a rotating cast because sometimes it will be Michael Porter because of what he can provide as an extra element to what the Jokic Murray 2-man game is. And like when you have a guy who can rebound and be an interior presence, that certainly helps too. But Aaron, I think, is really the most, like, he's the third most important guy on most nights, just because of how Denver likes to structure their lineups and their rotations where, and even their play calls, where Gordon is playing with Jokic and Murray more than the other two. He's playing with them in a horn setup. He's balancing out between different actions when they're on the elbow. When he's in the short corner, Jokic is always looking for him first on the rotations rather than the perimeter. And like he does really kind of fold into that really nicely. Like when you talk about 3-man combos, what those guys run between Jokic, Murray, and Gordon is some of the most dynamic stuff top to bottom in the entire NBA. But it's not to take away from KCP, who plays an integral role with what Denver does. Like, you can't just replace him with a Christian Braun and it be okay. You can't just replace him with a Peyton Watson or a Reggie Jackson or Julian Strawther and it be okay. What KCP does on both ends of the floor is so important for Denver in providing and becoming the best starting unit in the NBA. Like, there's levels to kind of how to evaluate Denver, right? Like, you've got Jokic and you've got the Jokic Murray 2-man game, and then you've got the Jokic Murray Gordon 3-man kind of weave that they run. But that stuff doesn't work as well unless KCP's out there spacing and guarding. And he takes a lot of pressure off of those guys on both ends of the floor as a result. So I'm with you. Like, it can be different players. It really can be. And I think that KCP, they call him first team when you're looking at all the post-game videos where he's getting the defensive player of the game chain from Denver. Like, he is a guy who takes a lot of pride in his defense. That's a goal that he's had for this year. And Denver isn't the level of defense that they are unless KCP is out there.
Yeah, and I mean, Gordon, I think, is the right answer, especially post Bruce Brown, because of Gordon's rim pressure and the playmaking that he brings. Like, that feels like if Bruce Brown was still on the team, that the conversation could maybe swing more towards MPJ and KCP on a lot of nights than it does right now. So I do think that's the right answer, but I think KCP is probably going to make one of my all defense teams this year. I'm about to go through it for a podcast, but I haven't gone like nitty gritty. The consistency he brings and the matchup difficulty. I mean, there's only 8 players who are guarding the highest usage player on the other team more often than KCP right now. And that's a really tough job. And this isn't necessarily part of the equation, but he's been injured like 80 times this year. It feels like it's always something different. He's dealing with a finger injury right now. And so and where he goes, championships follow, unless it's Detroit or Washington, obviously. But he is such a winning player, and his impact on this team, I just wanted to show him a little bit of love because I think that and the stuff he does on offense, I think, is important, where it's like someone who will get up threes on a team that's not shooting a ton of them relative to the league average, and some of the stuff he can do, like just from the in between and off the ball, of course. He's universally scalable and universally impactful. And they need him to be like, okay, can we not have him be dealing with like 8 different injuries at once we get to the postseason? Because that would be like huge for their playoff stock as well.
It's true. Like, this Nuggets team is not going to win a championship unless they're fully healthy. Like, that I think is probably the key factor here. Like, as much credit as you give Jokic, as much credit as you give Murray, it is all of the elements playing together that gives them their edge, that gives them the final juice that they need to get over the top against most of these teams. Like, and other teams might beat them. Like, that might be the case. But KCP is one of those guys. He's one of those examples that, like, he's had series where he shot 45, 50% from 3, like between the Lakers and the Nuggets. that have won series for teams. Like he could be a difference maker in that regard. He could be the guy who guards the opposing team's best player on a consistent basis. And he helped sort of shut the water off for Devin Booker in games 5 and 6 in the Western Conference semifinals. And like, he's a guy who can switch on to Jimmy Butler, or like whether it's LeBron or not really AD, but like he could do a lot. He spent most of his time on Anthony Edwards in the first round series, and he'll have to do the same thing in this next series as well. I'm sure that those teams will match up. So it's going to be fascinating, man. Like this team and like all of the construction around the starting unit, or starting with Jokic and Murray, but then building on to Gordon and Porter and KCP, like it is all almost like a house of cards in a way. And it's why I have some concerns, obviously, that I think have been well documented, but it's one of those things where KCP plays such a massive part in that. People don't fully understand or appreciate it. Like, it's not just like, he is not a replaceable player, and people should make sure to remember that.
Speaking, you mentioned 45% from three. I have a serious question that's going to come off as probably a comical one. Why is Michael Porter Jr. the most unpredictable 46.9% shooter on wide open threes in the NBA history? NBA history, excuse me.
He's funny, man. You would think that as often as he makes those shots, and as like automatic as he usually looks making those shots, that there are times in the third and fourth quarter, and when it kind of comes down to it, where you're like, man, got that wide open shot that swung right to Porter, and it just bricks. Like, sometimes it just happens. And like, I don't really know fully how to explain it, but he has moments where he is clutch. There's no doubt about it. But there are also ones where you're like, man, that's the one within the rhythm of the team that you're like, okay, this is one that you got to hit. And he just bricks it. So it's, I don't know, like it is a funny question, but he's such a talented shooter. It's wild to think of him as like having a down year shooting wise this year. And he is like, he's
39+%.
Yeah. Oh man,
a barrel over here. What's interesting about him, and I'm curious of your thoughts on his overall season, but not everyone, but I think a lot of the talk was about, if he's going to continue to develop, what does that look like on offense? And I think he has made a lot of valuable concessions on the offensive end. I also think there are probably more limitations to his offensive game outside the context of the Nuggets that people don't notice. There's not like I hate to throw this word around, there's not like a feel to his game where he's not going to table set for everybody else or navigate these spaces on the ball that are going to seem super intuitive. It feels like so much of his development over the past year plus has just come as like a defender, as a help defender, as someone who's going to be on the glass. And he really shined through during the playoffs last year. So what have you just made of the continued development or progress, growth, however you want to frame it, of his game this year?
Yeah, you look through some of the numbers and you're like, man, it would be nice if that assist percentage was higher than 6. Like that would be great. That would be awesome. But I want to make this point clear about his offense, that I think a lot of people call him a selfish player. A lot of people call him a chucker. I don't think that's true. I really don't. He has shown tendencies, especially lately over the last month or so. He's trying to pass, man. He really is. He's trying to set the table for not just himself, but for his team. It's not just for Jokic, but for Aaron Gordon and for Jamal Murray and KCP and guys like that. He had a nice pass to Reggie Jackson in the last game that ended up being a bucket. But like, he has these moments where you realize, okay, if his career had gone a slightly different route, where rather than kind of shrink his role in Denver, rather than say, okay, you're going to play a 3-and-D role for Denver, dude. If he had kind of developed within a rebuilding organization and been asked to be more of a playmaker for others, I think he would have been. I really do. I think that is still in him. And it's one of those things that Denver often tries to coax out of him. It's just good basketball plays that happen more and more frequently, just as he gets more and more comfortable. You look at the numbers and you don't necessarily see it, but I do think that it is there. I think that there are going to be moments where he has, like last year, it was a big deal when he had like 6 assists in a playoff game. Like it was a big deal. But how many playmaking opportunities do you really see Michael Porter ever having within Denver's offense? Like, it's just,
right.
He's always kind of the finisher on the perimeter in some of those, or the finisher at the rim in a lot of those. I wonder if they start building in more of those to sort of kind of coerce that out of his game a little bit more, because I do think it's there. I really do.
And it would be valuable to try and coax it, even though I don't believe it's necessarily there. You would know better than I would.
Yeah.
Just in case this Jamal Murray shin splints thing becomes like an issue and there are nights where you just don't have Jamal Murray. There will be at least 2 nights, we know, on one of the ends of the back-to-backs coming up. But if there's more, to have that additional, other than Gordon, and that's just kind of like, that's where you kind of miss Bruce Brown, is you have Reggie Jackson, but like the pass, dribble, decision make type of guys. If Michael Porter Jr. has any layer of that to him, one, to have that at, what is he, like 7'5" at this point, like with his size, like then it's just like game over. But that would be super useful, of course.
So it's funny. We actually have a nice sample size of this. When Jamal Murray went down, this is actually secretly one of the horrible things that happened for Denver in the 2021-22 season, where he played 9 games and then went down and he had to have a season-ending back surgery while Jamal Murray was gone. But the previous year before that, he played 18 games after Jamal Murray after he was sidelined with the torn ACL towards the end of that season. Averaged 23.5 points per game, 1.6 assists. So nothing crazy, obviously. And like, you want to see that happen more, but I do think that there is a scalability to his game that he, kind of like a lot of these guys, and you always have to sacrifice for a championship. That's one of those things. But there is more to him that I think you can coax it out of it. So I wonder if that's in his future at some point, whether it's with the Nuggets or with another team. I wonder if that's in his future where he becomes more of a playmaker and more of a creator for himself and others. And it starts to look a little bit more interesting.
He could be one of those players where maybe he just never leaves Denver, but like, what would peak Clay have looked like if he was tasked with more? And we know what his assist rate is and stuff, and we know what he looks like now, but just like peak Clay, the best version of Klay Thompson, what would that have looked like if he was even like just had to be any sort of creation, where it was just like the way the Warriors played just based on playmaking? He was never more than like the number 4 option, like in that sort of type of deal. So maybe that's a Michael Porter Jr. just sort of what if. Can we riff on some of Denver's most important kiddos who are obviously going to be pretty crucial to whatever happens in the playoffs?
Yeah.
Let's start with Christian Braun. Looks a lot better defensively lately. The hips are moving well in space and on defense. So is the footwork now. What are you watching with him though? Like offensively, I think a lot of people have given him the benefit of the doubt because of what he did in last year's playoffs, and that's fair. But we talk about peaks and plunges. It's been like plunge, little peak, plunge. Like he's just been all over the place on offense and not the best way possible this year.
Yeah, like that's one of those things that when you miss without Bruce Brown, right? Like he's one of those consistent 10, 11 point per game guys off the bench that you could always count on. And Christian hasn't really been that this year. I don't think anybody fully expected him to develop into that, but I expected a little bit more offensive development from the offseason to now. And maybe I shouldn't. He was a rookie coming off of a championship. He was vibing out for the entire time. I totally understand it. Like, do you, man? Like, it's all good. But I wonder if there is another level for him to get to as a secondary creator off of dribble drives, somebody who is a little bit more definitive with that rather than tentative. One of my pet peeves with him is he'll drive into nowhere and then pass it out with 5 seconds left on the shot clock, and then somebody else has to create something from 30 feet away from the basket. If he can avoid that and just get to the rim and be a little bit more consistent on those finishes at the 5 to 7 foot range, that would be so much more beneficial for Denver. Just being willing to take those, making them at a reasonable clip would be a big deal. That is really what is the difference between him being a rotation caliber player and a borderline starter caliber player. It's just having that little extra, like, teams aren't going to respect you. All right, go earn a bucket, earn a tough bucket in a tough situation. Like he could do with more of that.
Peyton Watson, endlessly fascinating. I've said too many times, probably it's a cliche on this podcast now, if you put caffeine in bodily form, I feel like it would be Peyton Watson. What have you sort of made of him in a larger role? There's the defensive disruption. There's the rim pressure and sort of the frenetic energy on offense. He's up to, 34% on threes now, which if that's like the clip he's at, that becomes ultra huge for the Nuggets leading into the postseason. What are you sort of, again, thoughts on him, and just what will you be watching most closely as we head into the stretch run?
I love Peyton, man. Like, I think he's one of those guys that you
just have to do both, buddy.
You have to be around him to fully understand, like, just how locked in and dialed he is as an individual and somebody who is a former 5-star recruit in California. He was the best player coming out of California his year. Like, that's an incredible talent. Like, it's an incredible thing to think about. Obviously lost out on some of the development and some of the playing time and some of the shine over the course of the previous 2 years. Now he's playing an integral role for Denver. And the more he shoots, the more I'm kind of convinced he might just be a better shooter than I ever thought he would be. Some of that comes with confidence, but he's got a good stroke. It looks good. And he plays like he is a shooter. He plays like he is somebody who should be taking these shots. And the more if he's trustable with that, if he can make good decisions with the ball in his hands, he's going to be a future starter. Like, I really do think that he's going to be one of those guys that you're wondering, like, how did Denver get this guy? How did they replace X with Peyton Watson, who's like this unbelievably talented defensive player who can also handle the ball a little bit? It's wild to think about, but I think he's on that trajectory.
It felt like, and not all the percentages support this when we're talking about Julian Strawther, but if he never gets injured, and Michael Malone had kind of talked about that him and Justin Holiday, when you're looking at a 9-man rotation, are kind of going to be on the outside looking in there. Is there a chance maybe that he kind of comes back around just because of the idea of him, the 3-point volume, the movement shooting? He is at, I think his overall 3-point clip is pretty low, but he's at 35+% on pull-up 3-pointers, which is very valuable. And like the fact that he has only hit like sub 32% of his wide open threes, it's no, like this dude, those will come. But what do you sort of make of, even if it's not this year, of what he can do for this team or his ceiling within this rotation eventually?
I'm a little bit lower on him in general, just because I think it's more Terrence Ross-like than it is like a dynamic, unbelievable offensive like shooter who can do it off of movement and creation. Now, there are some good things, don't get me wrong. And like, I could be wrong about this, to be clear. But when you think about what Denver needs around a Jokic and a Murray, it's going to be hard for them to put too much into Julian Strawther specifically, just because you've got these other guys who can switch and guard and defend and play make and do these things connective wise around what you've already got as your foundation. I do think Strawther could provide them with a little bit of a burst off the bench. There's no doubt about that. But he's got to be more than that, in my opinion. There's got to be more playmaking. And some of that just comes from opportunities and reps that Denver just hasn't been able to provide. But I do think that I'll be watching him in Summer League strongly for the next year. I assume he will play in Summer League next year. I want to see him go the Desmond Bane route and just like learn how to handle, learn how to create. And then like, because he has that in him, I believe. I really do think that he could be one of those guys that you kind of change that development curve a little bit and you start to see something really, really special. I just think right now he's kind of in that narrow bench shooter role, and I'm not sure what that provides value-wise for Denver.
So let's get into what got you in trouble. I know what some of your biggest concerns were or are for this team because I follow you on Twitter, but also you talked about them more at length on the last Pickaxe and Roll podcast. So what are your biggest concerns, or what were, and like, have any of them shifted based off how Denver has played coming out of the All-Star break? Which, by the way, as we're recording this, for us to shift any priors after 3 games would be a little ridiculous. Like, for people that want you to, like, you know, want your comeuppance because it's, like, you need to apologize. Like, it's been 3 games. Like, let's chill.
Believe me, I've been having that same discussion, man. It's brutal. It's brutal out here at these Denver streets. But no, it's the interesting thing that leading into the trade deadline, I thought Denver needed another guy that they could trust. I thought that so you've got the starters that you obviously trust. You've got Reggie Jackson, who's like, do you really trust Reggie Jackson? You have Christian Braun, who obviously you trust, but like, do you trust him to play the Bruce Brown role of last year? Then you have Peyton Watson, who, like, do you trust him to do more than what Jeff Green did last year for you? Maybe. I don't know. So Denver's got these guys, especially 2 young guys in Christian Braun and Peyton Watson, that they are putting so much pressure on. They're putting so much stock into and say, you have to be ready for this moment. You have to be ready for everything that comes with it. And if you are not ready, and then you're putting more pressure onto Reggie Jackson of all people, then now you're just starting to say, okay, starters, we got to play you each 42 minutes, 40 minutes, 42 minutes. And that's just not a sustainable way to get through a playoff series. Like, you just can't do that. For Denver, like, you need 4 of those. You need to get through 4 playoff series in order to have the goals and meet the goals of what you're supposed to do. So I thought that Denver needed another player. And clearly some people disagreed with me. I understand that. And like, look, people are going to be pretty arrogant, especially coming off of a championship. And I fully acknowledge that Denver and like those Nuggets fans, they might be right. And I might be wrong. But I don't think it's crazy to have concerns. I really don't. I think when you put a whole bunch of stock into 3 bench players, not just one, or like you have to put stock into all 3 of them and say, you got to be at your best heading into this playoff series for a defending champion with as much pressure on you as possible. That's just a tough ask, don't you think?
It is, especially when you haven't. I know Christian Braun has won at every level, and also Reggie Jackson has had some pretty like big playoff performances.
Sure, yeah.
But it's just like at the end of the day, it's Reggie. I mean, even you could have said it last year. At the end of the day, it was Bruce Brown, but he brought, I think, an entire package that no player right now is equipped to replace everything or check every box, even their peak version. Like if you're talking Christian Braun, Reggie Jackson, Peyton Watson, maybe if we're fast forwarding a couple of years, could it be Peyton Watson? I don't know. He'll ever have that sort of playmaking on ball, like decision-making element that Bruce Brown brought, which is probably what they missed the most, was like the combination of the decision-making and rim pressure Bruce Brown can give you. And I think that's where the biggest concern lies. And I don't think it's, I don't think it's taboo to have that concern. They might just be so good it doesn't fucking matter. Or if all your starters are healthy, maybe you don't need to play them 40 plus minutes because you're still winning these games by healthy margins. Because it kind of comes back to, there are people that tried to not diminish, or discredit, but sort of say, well, like, look at who the Nuggets were able to pull and didn't face any great teams last year. And it's, no, there were no great teams last year except the Nuggets. And the Nuggets did what great teams do, and they trucked the ever-living shit out of most of those teams. So I think your concern is fair, because even from, I know, again, they just watched Christian Braun play really well in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But to have to all of a sudden say and answer this, like last year we were able to say, who's the most important non-starter on the team? Bruce Brown. Done. Move on. Now I ask you this question: who is the most important non-starter on the team heading into the playoffs? I don't know that the answer is, I'm sure you have one. I want to hear it. I just, from my perspective, I don't think the answer is as cut and dry, and anyone who's making it cut and dry, I still don't know that that answer then is super comfortable.
My answer is all of them. And that's the problem, because last year Denver, and so I actually used this meme with David Brandon, who does OKC coverage. They are the flex tape guy. Like Bruce Brown was the flex tape guy, where you're like, hey, you got any hole in your lineup? You got any problems? Bam, Bruce Brown, let's go. Like that's what you do. And so that's Jamal Murray's outs, and you need a backup point guard. That's KCP's out. You need another perimeter defender. That's Michael Porter. You need somebody who's a little bit more defensive minded. Bruce Brown, there you go. And so they don't have that this year, and they're trying to piece it together with 3 different players in Reggie Jackson, Christian Braun, and Bruce Brown, and Peyton Watson. Excuse me. All 3 of those guys have different skill sets. All 3 of those guys do things that are different and that are necessary and helpful. If you need more shooting and scoring and dynamic creation, Reggie Jackson's probably your option. If you need more defense and stability, Christian Braun is your option. If you need more athleticism and versatility, then Peyton Watson's probably your guy. But you're going to need all of those things. And you probably need another guy. And you probably need some more size that they don't really have unless you believe in Zeke Naji. And they probably need a shooter that they don't really have unless you trust Julian Strawther. And so I come to this and I'm thinking, man, you kind of need all of those guys to hit, because if they don't, then you're just putting so much pressure on the top level talent to be out there, to do the things that they need to do. And like, look, are you going to need Jokic to be plus 15 every game because in the minutes that he's not out there, they're minus 14? I don't know. And so that is a stressful thing, man. If you're the steward of Nikola Jokic's prime and you think that he's that dude, you want to give him the best possible roster and the best possible candidates to help him get to that place. And I don't think that they did it. It might not matter.
It might not matter. And they're trying to do a tricky thing where no one really talks about the 2 timelines when it comes to them, but they're trying to set themselves up so that we can extend this title window, because those are so fleeting in the league. When people talk about why OKC didn't need to make a big trade, and maybe they didn't, but it's like they're going to run the league for the next 7 to 10 years. They might, just because they have so much draft equity to keep this thing rolling. But we just see these cores break up. Things happen, injuries happen, free agency, trade requests happen, other teams happen. I mean, Brooklyn seemed like a championship inevitability at one point, and look how quickly that thing came undone. And so the Nuggets are trying to build something sustainable, which is commendable. I just think there's risk there. As you said, it might not matter. If it ends up mattering, I do think what's a little valuable is like they're not beyond the point of like, okay, well, if this isn't going to work, we can still shift to prioritize this Nikola Jokic window rather than the second act of Nikola Jokic's title window. I just, my whole thing is, and I think I feel this way because they haven't been as healthy this year as last year. It feels like, at least anecdotally.
Yeah.
But I just watch them, and because their top five are so good, their top five, their starting lineup has a better net rating this year than it did last year. And that's just weird to say because the West is objectively tougher this year than it was last year. And that's why I respect what they're doing. I can't bring myself to care about it costing them a title because I don't think it will. They are my title pick, but I don't think it's unfair to discuss it. Like they're actively taking a risk here. I don't know what the alternative path was though. And that's the other thing. That's the other thing. They couldn't keep Bruce Brown. That just wasn't financially possible. And I don't know what moves would have been out there. Like who could they have got at the trade deadline that would have made you feel, I'm not asking you specifically, this is just hypothetical. I didn't see any move, any buyout guy. Like maybe you felt like, oh, if Thaddeus Young would have went to Denver and maybe you offset some of those Aaron Gordon, like small ball 5 minutes or try and play those two together. But like if you would rather play Peyton Watson more and give Zeke Naji a chance than age 58 Thaddeus Young, I'm not going to fault you for trying that. And so I think that's maybe why I feel not so strongly against, or why I don't feel more strongly about the risks involved here, because I don't know what the other paths forward were. Because even if you wanted to make a move that nudged the needle, they just didn't. Like, it would have cost you one of these young guys. And then when you got into salary matching, like, they don't just have dispensable salary fillers. Zeke Naji is the closest they're going to get to that next year when his extension kicks in. So I think that's an element as well. And maybe that's why some people pushed back on it. I still think everything you're saying, I just 1,000% agree with.
Yeah, like you want to maximize your window, right? You want to maximize your opportunities to be the best team that you can be when the time comes. And so there are three guys that I kind of had in mind with this discussion. Two were buyout guys. One was Danilo Gallinari. The other was DeLon Wright. Both guys that have been picked up and brought onto Eastern Conference powers that can really help those teams. The other's Andre Drummond, who like you needed 3 second-round picks in order to get him, apparently. Denver tried that last year with Thomas Bryant, and it didn't work. They really did. So I don't want to sit here and say that would have been perfect. But I do think that trying is probably the right course of action, especially because Denver's got guys like DeAndre Jordan, Vlatko Cancar, who's not going to be healthy and ready to go. They've got Hunter Tyson and Jalen Pickett under like contracts for full-time contracts for the team. You just run out of bodies that you feel like you can trust and play. And like, I just never want to approach a playoff situation like that and like have 2 hands tied behind my back, like that's one of those things where if it works out, great, because that's kind of the thing that's hiding under all of this is the second apron, and like the super tax apron is the reason why Denver is going this direction, because they're not going to be able to add anybody next year. Like they're not going to have the taxpayer MLE because they won't be able to add a guy like Bruce Brown in the future.
And if they do, it's because they traded someone arguably or lost because KCP has that player option.
Yeah, exactly. And so like that's not exactly stellar either. So you're not feeling too good about the actual external player additions that they can make other than one draft pick that they have in 2020. Like they've got a 2024 first. So they're going to keep trying to draft and develop, and hopefully some of these guys that they've drafted hit. But it is slim pickings out there for Denver.
I tend to try and de-emphasize the addition of buyout guys and how much they matter. DeLon Wright would have been absolutely perfect for this team, though. My next question for you on this team is what is some of the toughest well, actually, let's start here. How important is playoff seeding to them, do you think?
I think that they would like to avoid the 4 seed. I think that they like if they have a choice, then they'd probably want to be at least top 3, because hypothetically, if you're a 3 seed and both the 4 seed and the 3 seed win against the 1 and 2 seeds, then if you're a 3 seed, then you've got home court advantage in a Western Conference Finals. But that's about as much as they really care about. They don't necessarily need to get up to the 2 or the 1. I think that they'd prefer it. I think that that's something that they will try to do within their means, but they're not going to go out of their way in order to go for a specific number, like in order to go for a specific seed. I think that they're going to try to exceed last year's number of wins and let that be where it may. Because last year, if you get 55 wins this year, it might be a 4 seed. It honestly might, because of the way that all these teams are playing right now, and that might be fine. Like they can be of good quality of a 55 win team and win a championship, even from a 3 seed or a 4 seed.
And by the way, look, they're only, as we're recording this, they're 2 losses out of first place in the West. They could absolutely finish with the best record in the West again. I do think it's semi-important to finish with a top 3 seed because it increases the chances that you get, if you don't want to say easy, a very manageable first round matchup. And that's just important when you're looking at, because no matter where you are, second round, conference finals, NBA finals, that shit's going to hurt. That's going to be tough.
You just want to limit the number of games that you play early, right? Like you don't want to play 6 or 7 games in every single round because you'll just be tired out by the end of it. One of the sneaky things for Denver last year is they played 5 games in the first round, 6 games in the second round, 4 games in the third round, and 5 games in the conference or in the NBA.
Did they play in the third round that they swept again?
Yeah, they played some team in Los Angeles.
The most competitive sweep in NBA history.
Good for them.
I will say this is not necessarily like it is Nuggets related, but it feels weird that the 1 and the 2 seed have the least amount of time to prepare for their playoff matchups because of how the play. And so it's almost like, could the 3 seed be like the super comfy level where it's okay, you're going to have home court advantage through the first round and you've secured like the 6 matchup, which you can then prepare for while the play-in is happening. And it's probably not going, like if it ends up being Phoenix in the 6th seed or Luka, like, yeah, that kind of sucks. So would you prefer this version of the Warriors, the Lakers, whoever comes out of the play-in? But that's a weird function of the play-in tournament, by the way. And I don't know that, I'm sure people have talked about it. I haven't heard a ton of people talk about it though, where it's, oh, you have the best record in the Western Conference, your reward, or even the second best record is your reward is not really knowing who you're going to play in the first round until like 2 days before it starts.
Congratulations on your 36-hour window of preparation.
So you need, the Nuggets need to prioritize the 1 or the 3 seed. Those are because it's like, you're the 1. Okay. You know, that first play-in team gets in and then we prepare from there. To
be fair, the 2 seed though, they do get like 4 days because you get that 7-8 matchup in the play-in, then that's solved and you figure out, okay, who's going to face the 2 seed at that point. Like that's enough time.
There's only 2 options where it's like, okay, as opposed to but still it's just a weird quirk, right? Like the 3 seed has all this time to prepare and the 1 and the 2 technically have let. Look, they are going to finish first though. The Nikola Jokic text message was sent. I don't know that I would have predicted it before the text message, but and I would pay ungodly amounts of money to know what the contents of that text message said.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So looking into the playoffs, we don't need to get into specific when they could meet them. Are there any matchups for the Nuggets that you find either or both particularly compelling or could be very difficult for them?
Compelling specifically would be Dallas. That's one where you haven't seen Jokic and Luka go back and forth. Luka's like the one guy in the playoffs this year where you could realistically say, oh yeah, he could challenge for the best player in the series. Like he really could. With the way that he plays, I don't think that you could really say that about anybody else other than maybe Shai, I guess, maybe Kawhi, but like I'm not really.
Kawhi for sure. I would go back and forth on Shai just because of how Jokic could just dissect you with his passing, and Shai just outside of his drives is not going to set up to that. And I love Shai, but
yeah, like it's fascinating to think about. Like those will be tough matchups in their individual right, but I like the idea of the Luka versus Jokic dynamic and those guys kind of bringing it out of each other, the best possible performances that they could have. Like I think that the talent that Dallas has now on the offensive end is going to be tough to stop for obvious reasons.
And they've decided to play defense ever since the trade deadline too, which is
look at that. That's a big deal.
I'm prepared to eat a lot of shit on my PJ Washington trade thoughts. Let's just
I don't think you're going to have to for what it's worth. Yeah, like it'll be interesting. Like I think that Dallas will be a tough out. I don't care about the Warriors or the Lakers, to be frank. Like they're it is what it is.
I would have cared about the Warriors a little bit until I just saw what Nikola Jokic did to Draymond Green. And that's not even a function of, oh, Draymond, you suck. No, Draymond played, he was spectacular on defense that game. Nikola Jokic is just, I think it's Adam Mata says this all the time, perfect offense beats perfect defense.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And Jokic will have that in several of these matchups, whether it's against Draymond, whether it's against, like, frankly, even somebody like Rudy Gobert. Although that's probably the one that you got to circle back to and say, yeah, the Timberwolves, they are the toughest possible matchup from a personnel standpoint for Denver, because they've got this athletic shooting guard who can get to where he wants on the floor. And is like, if he shoots like Jordan in the playoffs, then like Anthony Edwards,
another guy where it's like his value might skyrocket in the playoffs relative to the regular season.
Yeah, who knows? Like it's those pieces of development, like they come faster than what people really expect. So he could, like, just watch out for it, obviously, folks. But him being that good, Rudy Gobert, Karl-Anthony Towns, Naz Reid kind of being a trio of bigs that you can throw at Jokic, especially Gobert. That's a big one to watch. And then Jaden McDaniels on ball and Nickeil Alexander-Walker on ball against Jamal Murray.
By the way,
that is going to be tough.
For the listeners at home, I don't know if he'll have the playing time, but Nah might need some all defense consideration, which is why he has been really good this year. Sorry, just random tangent.
Really good. No, you're right, because how do you stop Denver's offense? You have to be able to play it 2-on-2. You have to be able to rotate behind it really effectively. And you've got to have guys that are dialed in and are long and athletic and physical and versatile. And they have that. They have that in spades with their personnel for sure. So that's one that I've been watching, that I've identified. Denver plays Minnesota 3 times over the course of the rest of the regular season. So they only face them once in the 5th game of the regular season. So I want to see what those matchups look like now. I want to see what they kind of envision, and whether Jaden McDaniels is going to give constant pressure to Jamal Murray or somebody like that. That'll be fascinating to watch.
And those matchups can actually inform the play. I like the middle of the season matchups, the early season matchups. I never go back and look at those really to try and do playoff previews or breakdowns, because I just feel like so much changes. It's the situations like this where it's like you said, in the stretch run, they play Minnesota 3 times. Those might inform and instruct how the series unfolds. And so those are big games. I was surprised you said Dallas. They don't particularly concern me. It's Minnesota. I feel like while Denver can very much handle OKC, they can do some stuff with just their lineups when you're going to play smaller, that I think in their drive game, getting like in go in there could cause them problems. But I just look at how they don't really have anyone physical enough to like even impede Nikola Jokic. So the Timberwolves are definitely my top option. And then I don't want to say this because it feels wrong, but if the Clippers are fully healthy, just the level of basketball they've played, it does feel like we could see this unfold differently than we've seen in all the matchups past. I know the Clippers just beat them. That game was super important to them. But the caveat there is, I think you can make the case that James Harden is their most important playoff player when you look at what defenses are going to do and the passing breakdowns that we've seen from the Clippers in previous postseasons. And again, the problem with that is the Clippers have also just never been fully healthy since basically the dawn of time in the postseasons. And you can't trust James Harden in the playoffs. That's proven fact right now. And so that's why I don't want to dismiss everyone else in the West and just say it's really only the Timberwolves that, if I'm the Nuggets, I kind of give like a second or third pause to. But the Clippers might be the number 2 team for me, which feels so incorrect just by me voicing it aloud. I'm glad this is a safe space because I just feel so wrong saying it.
I mean, look, the last time that Jokic faced the Clippers, he went 9 of 32 from the field. So there's something to it. And like, if they can slow him down in any way, shape, or form, then that's a little bit different. Now, was Jokic at his most focused at that point? Probably not. Was he going out with Ivica Zubac and just vibing
Who's a better defender probably than people like that's like a big burly dude who moves his feet.
Yeah.
And so like he's going to give Jokic more problems than Chet Holmgren will, because what Chet Holmgren does isn't going to scale to the perimeter as much. And if you do get in those back down situations with Jokic, like he's just not going to have the level of physical. I mean, he has the length and the shot blocking chops, no doubt.
It's whether Jokic is going to be dialed in on those shots that are a little bit tougher for him. Like every shot is tough that he takes for the most part, but there are certain ones that when he gets into the body of somebody else, he's got to finish an off balance 8-foot hook shot or a turnaround fadeaway, whatever it ends up being. Like if he hits those, then they'll win the series. I think that with their defense, like the Clippers have a great offense. There's no doubt about it. They have a nice mix and a lot of different players that can initiate. Denver's defense is just going to be so dialed for that series, though. They're not going to be able to generate as many open shots the Clippers do as they do in some of these other matchups, because Denver can mix and match some of these, and Jokic will just be better. Like he'll be better in a series like that against that team.
I will say I kind of want to see them play Phoenix just because I feel like Jokic will average a 40-point triple-double going up against Nurk.
Bro,
I think that would be I think that's what ends up happening in
that's
that series.
the peak. That would be awesome. There's no love lost between Nurkic and the Nuggets. There's no doubt about that.
I promise I'm not trying to add any toxicity to this discussion, but what do you make of the MVP race so far, where Nikola Jokic is still favored? And I think he's still the betting favorite. He finished the top. Tim Bontemps' last straw poll, but there has been a groundswell for not just Shai, but also Luka and even Giannis a little bit. I think those are the four guys that the MVP.
Haven't you heard, man? Jason Tatum, he's the best player on the best team.
Yeah, I don't know. All right, moving right on. Jason Tatum, great player. Anyway, moving right along off that one. Yeah. Do you think Nikola Jokic is kind of like the gap is just, especially now, is like a little bit too large? Or do you look at any of the other cases and say, oh, this guy has like a legitimate case to win this award over Jokic this season?
I think SGA has a legitimate case. Like think about where OKC was projected to be and what they have done instead. Like people look back on that, and there's a lot of revisionist history on that. I thought that OKC was going to win about 40 to 45 games, be in that range. I think they're already crossed that threshold. Like they are so good, and SGA is so good on both ends of the floor, and that really does matter. Like I know a lot of people will have like different criticisms of Jokic. Like I don't think his defense is as good as SGA's defense, which is probably where like some of the gaps will be held there. But with what SGA does to carry that team, he's clearly their best player. He's clearly a guy that they can trust on both ends of the floor. And at the end of the game, I think he's somebody that would absolutely factor into this race, especially at the top of the West. If they were to win the Western Conference in the regular season, that would bear a lot of fruit for a lot of people. With Giannis, like it has been, for whatever reason, Bucks fans are like Nuggets ops at this point. I don't know where that happened. Like what happened? Like these two were supposed to be like, let's go. Like this is the united front against Joel Embiid, was the Giannis stands and Jokic stands. That was what was supposed to happen. It has happened in an opposite way, and I don't really understand it. But Giannis doesn't have a great case. Like he doesn't. I don't think that he like these numbers are great. Don't get me wrong. The numbers individually are great, but there is too much going on around that team to really like. So much of it has just been very, very odd. And there is a lot of defensive impact stuff that I can break up with Giannis that everybody just assumes his defensive impact is amazing. It's awesome. It's wonderful. But I don't see it a lot of the time with like so many of their lineups. Brook Lopez is the guy that's really driving a lot of their success, is their primary rim protector, the guy who's walling off the paint. And I've seen it against Denver specifically. Like, I think that Giannis is a distant fourth. Personally, I think that Luka has passed him with the way that he's done things individually. He's been great. And the burden that Luka has to carry, often, given that Kyrie has missed so many games, it has been very noticeable. But I just think that Luka's numbers are better than Giannis's. I think that Shai has a great team case and a great individual defense case. But I think that Jokic is still the MVP. I really do. And he's going to be at the center of it for most people until he loses track of it in mid-March, where he's like, you know what, I'm getting like, there's too much MVP buzz. Let me put up a 6 and 12 game, or something like that.
I probably am a little bit higher on Giannis's case than you, just looking at the numbers and what he can still do defensively. But I do agree that Shai feels like the biggest threat right now. Jokic is my MVP pick at the moment still. I do wonder, you mentioned this, the late season stretch, and Shai, his case might end up being, if he's going to be invested in getting that award, and Jokic isn't as invested in getting that, that might be what sways it. But I do think Jokic is the MVP as of now. Ryan,
it's just clearly the best player, by the way. Like it's hard for me to go against that too much. And that if their cases are individually similar, then like it's fair to have Jokic as the guy, personally.
Ryan, this was great. Thank you for giving me so much of your time. Are you able just to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the fantastic work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. I do writing for Mile High Sports, covering the Denver Nuggets. And if you're interested in general NBA stuff on YouTube, then I do a podcast called The Alley-Oop, which had a little bit of a hiatus lately, but we'll try to get that back on track. So make sure to be on the lookout for it.
Yes, definitely check it out, and especially the work he's doing for Mile High Sports as well. Ryan, thank you so much once again. Rest assured, I will be pestering you again down the line.
Thank you, sir.